Hi, I'm Kathy Fedke, and welcome to BiggerPockets On the Market YouTube channel. I'm one of the co-hosts of On the Market, and I wanted to look back at one of the episodes that we did last year. It was our most popular yet, and it's called America's Largest Wealth Transfer Has Begun. Are you ready? It's definitely worth listening to still, even though it's a year old. But I wanted to look back at that and see if what we said then is true today. And I would say 100% it is. So the idea is that there's this wealth transfer happening. How is it happening and who's getting the money? In the episode that we did a year ago, we talked about how the central banks inflate the economy. They create bubbles, and they do that either by making money cheap or making it more expensive. So when money becomes cheap, like it was, pretty much since the Great Recession of 2008, when the Federal Reserve really lowered the overnight lending rate, that is the rate that you hear about in the headlines all the time that the Federal Reserve controls. And when they lower rates, and in this case, in 2008, it was near zero levels, that makes the cost of borrowing really, really cheap. And when it's cheap to borrow, well, people borrow it. And when they spend money, well, that stimulates the economy. So we saw it, a real estate bubble certainly perk up over the past decade in commercial and residential real estate because the cost to borrow was so cheap. When your payment can be lower because of those low rates, you can afford a higher price house. But what happens when the Federal Reserve wants to reverse that? What if too many people are borrowing money and the economy gets too bloated because of all of the things that people are buying and all the debt? Well, of course, that's what we saw over the last 2 years is the Fed reversing their policy and raising rates dramatically at the fastest pace that we've seen, at least in my lifetime, or at least in my financial lifetime, maybe when I was little and didn't care so much. But when you go from near zero to where we are today, 5.25%, 5.5%, that is a dramatic change. For example, let's just say you were going to go buy a car a couple of years ago when interest rates were at near zero levels. Well, your payment might have been $500. But if you try to get that same car today, the payment might be $1,000 or even $1,500. You're not going to get that car. It's not going to make any sense. You'll just stick with the old car you have and maybe fix it up. Same with real estate. If that $500,000 house is a $2,500 month payment. I'm just making these numbers up. You might get that house. It might be the same or almost equal to renting the same house. So why wouldn't you buy it? But today, that same house might be double or even almost triple what it cost just a few years ago in payment. So the Federal Reserve has this incredible power to influence whether we buy things or not. And of course, the reason that the Fed is making the cost of money so expensive right now is they don't want us to spend money. Because when we spend money, companies have to make more things. They have to hire more people. And to get those people, they have to pay them more. And that, of course, creates inflation because all of those costs are passed on to the consumer. And that's what the Federal Reserve has been going so aggressively after. As you know, we've talked about it on the market so many times. The Federal Reserve has two mandates: price stability and full employment. So how do you slow down the economy and control the prices while also making sure employment is strong? That is a fine line and very difficult for them to do. Up until now, the job market has been really robust, but just now we're starting to see things slow down. Just last year and over the past few years, we had far more jobs than the people who wanted them. But we're almost back in balance now. It's still a strong labor market, not overly strong like it was a few years ago. But coming back to the episode that we did just last year, again called America's Largest Wealth Transfer Has Begun, Are You Ready? What do we mean by that? Well, what our guest, Chris Martenson, was saying at the time was that the Fed is using tools that really haven't been used before. Sure, the Fed was used to raising rates or lowering rates to kind of speed up or slow down the economy. But what's fairly new is another thing that isn't talked about as much and really should be, and that's the quantitative easing, which basically means that the Fed would create money and buy mortgage-backed securities or treasuries. And we saw a lot of that during the pandemic in order to keep rates down, the Fed was creating money out of thin air and buying mortgage-backed securities, again, to keep rates low for mortgages. And as a result, of course, we saw the price of housing go up dramatically. Now, the Fed has been saying that they want to unwind its balance sheet, which means sell off those mortgage-backed securities. And if they do, and when they do, and they are a little bit, but they own a lot. As they put these on the market, well, there need to be enough buyers. And if there aren't enough buyers, then mortgages go up. The cost of mortgages go up. So we're not really seeing the Fed unload its balance sheet as quickly as they have said they would. So again, what does this all mean to you and why does it matter? Well, it's because this new financial tool that the Fed is using, again, quantitative easing, it's only been around for, 15 years or so. Unfortunately, the result of that seems to be flooding the market with more money. And when there's more money, it goes towards generally stocks and real estate. So what is this wealth transfer that we were talking about in that episode, which was episode 105, again, with Chris Martenson, America's Largest Wealth Transfer Has Begun is what it was titled. And it had 192,000 views. So it really hit a nerve. I think it helped people to see what's really going on. In that, we were explaining that basically the Fed has two decisions to make. And one is to either deflate some of these bubbles that have been created, and nobody really wants that. That leads to recession. The other option is to continue to inflate, sort of inflate the debt away. Because if you think about it, as the dollar becomes less valuable because there's more of it printed, then it kind of makes it easier to pay off your enormous debt. So if you were the Fed or a politician, would you choose deflation and have a lot of angry people in recession, or would you choose inflation, which is kind of a secret tax and people don't know what's really going on? It just makes people happy because more money is created and it is distributed in the form of, student loan forgiveness or down payments for real estate or whatever it is. Usually these benefits are wonderful and people like them. What they don't know is how it's really affecting them in the long run, which is this divide between the rich and the poor. So if we can't change this game, and the Fed really can't change the game either, we're kind of backed in a corner. How do you live with it? What do you do in this scenario? This isn't just the US economy that lives on its own without any influence. We live in a global economy where we buy and sell to each other in different countries. It is a global phenomenon. And globally, about $20 trillion of new money was just created by the different central banks around the world in just 18 months to 2 years. That's an enormous amount of money that flooded into the system after COVID or during COVID, to prop things up as people were stuck at home. But there were consequences to that. And the consequences is what we're calling this wealth transfer. So when you have $20 trillion circulating, and just to give you an idea of how much money that is, back in 2007, $7 trillion was the entire economy of the US, or I should say US dollars in circulation. That amount of money our Federal Reserve created within 18 months, $7 trillion, and then globally, 20 trillion. So that is why there are bubbles all over the world popping up. And that's why, of course, inflation has been an issue worldwide. So let's see how accurate we were on this prediction that the wealthy would get more wealthy as a result of this, and the poor would become more poor as a result. Let's look at this most recent headline. This one is U.S. household net worth rose to a record level in 2023 on stock holdings. Net worth rose 8% in 2023 to $156 trillion. Here's another article from Investopedia. An increase of $2.5 trillion. I don't even know if I know how to write that number. It's a huge number. Just in America's real estate assets sets the second quarter of 2023 apart as one of the highest to date. The real estate wealth growth recorded in the second quarter of 2023 is second only to the first quarter of 2022, when real estate assets increased $3.5 trillion. Once again, this is a real example of how this money creation finds its way into real estate and stocks, and those assets grow. And people who have not invested in either real estate or stocks are kind of left to have to deal with rising prices without necessarily having rising wages or assets that grow in value to keep up with all of that. That's why I know I sometimes sound like a real estate agent who are famous for saying, when is the best time to buy real estate? Today. I actually do believe that, but not because I want to make a real estate commission, but because I'm very concerned about people who aren't able to jump on this wagon of either jumping into real estate or the stock market. And of course, both the real estate and stock market depend very much, the success of it depends very much on what you specifically invest in. You can lose money in both for sure. But overall, if you invest properly and correctly and really do your underwriting the right way, this is how you will be on that boat that is getting the transfer of wealth. I just want to say it again. As we flood the market with so much cash that drives prices up through inflation, people on fixed incomes are the ones who suffer. So the poorest are becoming poorer because they can't afford even their basic needs. I want to emphasize this so that people stop thinking that it's okay to print money and just hand it out. Those who need it the most and need those handouts are the ones who are hurt the most by this. Everything costs money. It has to come from somewhere. And that tax that people don't know about is inflation. Another example of where all this wealth is, well, here's an article from Go Banking Rates. The title is More Than Half of U.S. Wealth Belongs to Baby Boomers. Will other generations catch up? This is the big question. And I know that boomers get a lot of hate for this. I do want to give the perspective that boomers are old, right? The youngest of the boomers are 60 now. The oldest are around 80. Most people, when they're young, hope to buy a house, be able to live in that house, and after 30 years have it paid off, and they live in it free and clear. Well, boomers, if they bought their house when most people buy their first house in their early 30s or mid 30s, they would have that home paid off in 30 years. And because the Federal Reserve has been inflating, like I said, assets, not only are those homes paid off, but they've gone up dramatically in value. Don't hate on the boomers. It's not their fault. They did what they were told to do, which is buy a house and pay it off in 30 years, and they're really benefiting. Will you have that same opportunity? I can't see any other way unless the US dollar just absolutely explodes and America goes downhill. I don't think that will happen. I still believe we are the number one superpower. And as I said, the Federal Reserve has two choices: to deflate or to inflate. And I do believe they're going to continue inflating. You have the same opportunity as the boomers to buy your home paid off over 30 years. And most likely that home will have doubled, tripled, or quadrupled by the time you're ready to retire. It is truly the best way to generate wealth, owning real estate. And what if you bought more than your primary residence? What if you bought a few rentals that provides housing for other people and also would be paid off in 30 years and inflate as well? This is what many boomers have done, and they're holding a lot of the wealth. Now, instead of hating on the boomers or being jealous, maybe hug one, get to know one. And here's why. There will be another great wealth transfer over the next few decades. Here's an article by the Sorelli Report. The title of it is U.S. High Net Worth and Ultra High Net Worth Markets 2021. The idea is that eventually baby boomers will pass on. As I said, the oldest are 80. And according to the statistics, the Gen X generation, which is right after the boomers, would inherit about $30 trillion of that wealth. Millennials would inherit $27 trillion and Gen Z, $11 trillion. But keep in mind, Gen Z would eventually be inheriting what the Gen Xers got, and hopefully also creating their own wealth. And this is estimated wealth to be inherited through 2045. So basically over the next 2 decades. So this wealth today will be spread out to the younger generations. It's not like it's going to just pull out of real estate and out of the stock market. It's going to be passed on to young people. So it's more important than ever that young people really understand how to invest properly. So when they do inherit that money, they don't just blow it on a lot of concerts and fun things. Definitely go have fun. No one's saying not to do that, but make sure you understand investing and these financial markets, because there's a lot of money that's going to be inherited over the next couple of decades. I'm Kathy Fettke, and again, I highly recommend that you listen to the episode that so many people enjoyed, episode 105 of BiggerPockets on the Market, presented by Fundrise. The title, America's Largest Wealth Transfer Has Begun. Are you ready? Hopefully today has helped you get a little bit more ready. And on BiggerPockets, on the forums, so you just go to biggerpockets.com, or on one of the many podcasts, you can learn how to be ready. And I'm Kathy Fettke. Thanks for joining me here. I'll see you on some next episodes of On the Market.